There was once a young seeker who desired abundance. Not the kind of abundance that only fills a house with objects, but the kind that fills a life with meaning, ease, and quiet strength. He asked a wandering teacher, "How does one become wealthy without becoming empty inside?" The teacher looked at him for a long time, as if listening to something beyond words, and then said, "You are asking how to hold fire without being burned. It is possible, but only if you first understand what fire truly is. In this way begins the path of the awakened millionaire, the one who builds wealth without losing the soul. Wealth in its purest form is not the enemy of peace. It is attachment that becomes the burden. Money, like water, flows where it is directed. It can nourish roots or flood the field, depending on the hand that guides it. The awakened one does not reject wealth, nor chase it blindly. He learns to relate to it as a tool, not a master. Many chase wealth thinking it will complete them. But completion is not found in accumulation. It is found in clarity. When desire is uncontrolled, even a mountain of gold feels like dust slipping through the fingers. When desire is understood, even a simple meal carries the taste of contentment. The awakened millionaire begins differently. Before asking, "How do I earn more?" he asks, "What am I becoming while I earn?" This question changes the direction of life. For income without integrity becomes a chain, while income guided by awareness becomes a path. There was a merchant in a great city who once made his fortune quickly. His warehouses filled, his accounts grew, and his influence spread. Yet each night he slept lightly, as if something unseen was sitting beside his bed. One day he visited a quiet sage and said, "I have everything I once wanted, but I feel I am losing something I cannot name." The sage replied, "You have gained in your hands, but lost in your heart. Tell me, when was the last time you gave without expecting return?" The merchant was silent. In that silence, something within him softened. Slowly he began to understand that wealth is not measured by possession, but by circulation. What flows through you strengthens you. What is hoarded and stagnates. The awakened millionaire learns this early. Generosity is not the result of wealth, it is the foundation of it. A closed hand may hold more temporarily, but it cannot receive. An open hand both gives and receives without fear. Yet generosity alone is not enough. There must also be wisdom. Just as a river needs banks to guide its flow, wealth needs discipline to prevent destruction. Without discipline, abundance turns into noise, distraction, and restlessness. With discipline, even modest means become powerful. The awakened one watches his habits closely. He sees how small decisions shape destiny. He understands that every expense is also a vote for the kind of life he is building. In this awareness, spending becomes conscious, not compulsive. Earning becomes meaningful, not hollow. There is also the question of identity. Many believe I am what I own, but ownership is temporary. It arrives and it leaves. If identity is built on what changes, then suffering becomes inevitable. The awakened millionaire builds identity on awareness itself, on the ability to observe gain and loss without being destroyed by either. When profit comes, he does not become inflated. When loss comes, he does not collapse. He understands both as movement within a larger rhythm. Like seasons, they come and go. The tree does not panic in winter nor boast in spring. It simply remains rooted. This rootedness is the true wealth. Another essential understanding arises. Time is more valuable than money. Money lost can be regained. Time lost does not return. The awakened millionaire does not trade his entire life for accumulation alone. He asks, "Is this exchange worthy of my days?" In this question, many unnecessary pursuits dissolve. He learns to simplify. Not out of lack, but out of clarity. Simplicity is not poverty, it is precision. It is choosing what matters and releasing what does not. In simplicity, life becomes lighter, and in lightness, vision becomes clear. There is also inner silence. Without it, wealth becomes noise. With it, even ordinary moments become rich. The awakened one practices returning to silence regularly, not as escape, but as alignment. In silence, greed loses its urgency, comparison loses its grip, and gratitude begins to grow naturally. He also understands responsibility. Wealth is never isolated. It touches families, communities, and generations. Every gain carries a consequence beyond the self. To be awakened in wealth is to be awake to its impact. This awareness transforms ambition into stewardship. A person walking this path does not ask only how much can I earn, but also how much good can flow through what I earn. In this shift, wealth becomes less about ownership and more about contribution. Over time, something subtle happens. The chase becomes calmer. The fear of loss weakens. The need to prove oneself dissolves. What remains is steady engagement with life, where earning and giving, building and releasing exist in balance. And in that balance, a strange thing is discovered. The soul does not oppose wealth. It only opposes confusion. When clarity is present, wealth becomes a companion rather than a threat. The awakened millionaire is not one who is trapped by it. He is one who moves through it with open eyes and an unburdened heart. He builds but does not cling. He succeeds but does not forget. He enjoys but does not lose awareness. In the end, wealth is not the measure of awakening, but the way one relates to wealth reveals the depth of awakening. And so the teaching remains simple: earn without greed, possess without bondage, give without fear, live without losing awareness. In this way, abundance and inner freedom walk together not as enemies but as companions on the same path. Wealth is a tool, not a master. True abundance is not about obsession with money, but about understanding it as a means for living wisely and supporting life, not controlling it. Wealth, when understood deeply, is not merely numbers in motion or possessions gathered over time. It is a current that flows through human life, shaping experiences, opportunities, and responsibilities. When a person begins the journey of earning, the mind often believes that accumulation is the final goal. Yet as understanding matures, a subtler truth appears. Wealth is not meant to be possessed as a burden, but understood as a tool that must serve life, not dominate it. To treat wealth as a master is to slowly surrender inner freedom. The mind becomes restless, always calculating more, always fearing less. Even when abundance arrives, it feels unstable because the foundation is not clarity but craving. In this state, money does not bring ease, it multiplies anxiety. The awakened approach is different. It begins with observation, seeing money as energy that moves through systems, hands, and intentions. When used with awareness, it becomes supportive. When chased blindly, it becomes consuming. A person who understands this begins to change their relationship with earning. Work is no longer only a pursuit of gain, but a process of expression and contribution. Instead of asking only how much can be taken, the question slowly becomes what value can be created. This shift transforms effort itself. The same action, when rooted in awareness, carries dignity rather than desperation. Income becomes a reflection of clarity rather than pressure. In daily life, this understanding also changes decision-making. Spending is no longer impulsive, driven by comparison or insecurity. It becomes conscious, guided by necessity and purpose. Every financial action is seen as a small movement in a larger pattern. Some choices strengthen stability, while others weaken it. Awareness brings precision, and precision brings balance. At the same time, the mind begins to notice how attachment forms silently. Even small successes can create identity. A person may begin to think, I am successful because I have this, or I am secure because I own that. But ownership is never permanent. Everything that is possessed is also subject to change. When identity is built on what is unstable, fear naturally follows. The awakened perspective gently loosens this grip. It encourages seeing achievements as passing conditions rather than fixed definitions of self. With this understanding, wealth no longer feels like a weight to carry or a race to win. It becomes a flow to participate in. Like rivers nourishing land, wealth serves life when it moves freely and wisely. Holding it too tightly restricts its natural function. Letting it move consciously allows it to support not only the individual but also the wider world around them. Over time, a calmness begins to settle. The urgency to constantly acquire fades. What remains is a steady engagement with life where earning, saving, and giving exist in harmony. In this balance, wealth stops being a source of inner conflict and becomes a quiet companion. It supports living but does not define it. Awareness matters more than accumulation. The quality of who you become while earning is more important than how much you earn. Conscious action shapes lasting success. When wealth is approached without awareness, it becomes a mirror that reflects restlessness back to the mind. Many believe that increasing possessions will automatically create stability in life, yet experience often shows the opposite. The more the desire expands without understanding, the more fragile the inner state becomes. This is because wealth in itself does not carry peace or disturbance, it simply amplifies the intention with which it is held. When a person begins to see wealth with clarity, a different relationship emerges. Instead of being driven by constant urgency, the mind starts to observe the patterns behind earning and spending. It becomes clear that wealth is not a static achievement but a continuous movement. It flows in, flows out, and changes form depending on decisions and awareness. Recognizing this movement reduces fear because nothing is seen as permanently lost or permanently secured. At this stage, work also transforms. It is no longer just a struggle for survival or a competition with others. It becomes a space where skill, discipline, and contribution meet. When actions are guided by awareness rather than pressure, even ordinary tasks begin to carry meaning. The focus shifts from simply getting more to doing better, and this shift naturally improves both quality and outcome. However, the mind often resists simplicity at first. It is conditioned to associate more with better and less with lack. So when the idea of conscious limitation or mindful control is introduced, it may feel uncomfortable. Yet with reflection, it becomes clear that uncontrolled expansion often leads to exhaustion, not fulfillment. A life without direction in financial choices becomes scattered, no matter how large the income. As awareness deepens, a subtle understanding arises. Wealth is not only external but also internal in its impact. It shapes emotions, thoughts, and relationships. A person constantly chasing money may unknowingly neglect presence, patience, and clarity. On the other hand, a person who engages with wealth mindfully begins to notice that peace is not delayed until a certain amount is reached. It is available in the way one relates to each moment of earning and spending. This realization brings responsibility. Money is no longer seen as separate from life, but as part of life's ethical flow. Every financial decision carries consequences beyond the immediate result. It affects not only the individual but also others connected through exchange, service, or dependency. When this interconnectedness is understood, care naturally enters financial behavior. Waste decreases, intention strengthens, and priorities become clearer. With time, the pursuit of wealth becomes less about proving worth and more about maintaining balance. There is still ambition, but it is guided by stability rather than insecurity. There is still growth, but it is measured not only in numbers but also in clarity of mind and quality of life. In this way, wealth becomes something that supports existence rather than overwhelms it. It remains useful, active, and meaningful, but it no longer defines identity. Instead, it becomes one part of a larger, more grounded way of living where awareness leads and accumulation simply follows in its proper place. Generosity creates flow and growth. Wealth is strengthened when it circulates. Giving with awareness keeps abundance alive, while hoarding leads to stagnation. When wealth is observed without distortion, it becomes clear that its true value is not in possession but in direction. Money itself is neutral, like wind passing through open space. It can strengthen a sail or scatter dust depending on how it is engaged. The human mind, however, often assigns emotion and identity to it, which is where confusion begins. This confusion creates attachment, and attachment creates imbalance. When awareness enters, this pattern slowly begins to dissolve. A person who is awakening to a healthier understanding of wealth starts to notice how intention shapes experience. If the intention is fear-based, even success feels unstable. If the intention is grounded in clarity, even modest progress feels steady and meaningful. This shift is subtle but powerful because it changes the internal foundation upon which financial life is built. Instead of reacting to circumstances, the mind begins to respond with understanding. Over time, it becomes evident that wealth does not exist in isolation from behavior. It is directly connected to discipline, patience, and clarity of thought. Without discipline, earnings are easily scattered. Without patience, decisions become impulsive. Without clarity, even large opportunities are misunderstood or misused. When these qualities are present, wealth begins to stabilize naturally, not because of external control alone, but because of internal alignment. At this stage of understanding, comparison begins to lose its influence. The habit of measuring oneself against others is one of the greatest sources of financial dissatisfaction. It creates unnecessary urgency and often leads to choices that are not aligned with one's actual needs or capacity. When awareness replaces comparison, decisions become more honest. A person begins to ask, what is truly necessary for my life, rather than what do others have that I lack. This shift also changes the experience of success. Success is no longer a distant destination that constantly moves further away. Instead, it becomes a series of grounded moments where actions and values are aligned. Each decision made with awareness becomes a small expression of stability. In this way, wealth is no longer a single achievement but a continuous practice of conscious living. As understanding deepens further, generosity naturally arises, not as obligation but as recognition of flow. When a person sees that wealth is constantly moving through life, the idea of holding it tightly begins to feel unnecessary. Giving becomes a way of maintaining balance, not losing control. It reinforces the understanding that nothing truly belongs permanently, and that everything participates in a larger exchange. With this realization, fear of loss begins to weaken. Loss and gain are no longer seen as final states but as changing conditions. This does not eliminate responsibility. Instead, it brings calm responsibility. Decisions are made with care but without panic. Effort continues but without desperation. Eventually, wealth becomes less about defining identity and more about supporting life. It serves needs, enables growth, and creates opportunities, but it no longer dictates emotional state. In this mature relationship, there is a quiet strength. Life becomes less about chasing and more about understanding. And in that understanding, wealth finds its rightful place, useful, flowing, and no longer burdensome. Inner discipline protects external success. Without self-control and mindful habits, wealth turns into chaos. Discipline turns income into stability and purpose. When discipline enters the life of a person dealing with wealth, everything begins to shift in a quiet but powerful way. Discipline is not harsh restriction, it is clarity in action. It is the ability to choose what is necessary over what is impulsive and what is sustainable over what is momentarily satisfying. Without discipline, wealth behaves like water without a container, spreading in all directions, losing its usefulness. With discipline, that same flow becomes structured, purposeful, and life-supporting. At first, discipline may feel like limitation. The mind, used to instant response and emotional spending, resists structure. It interprets restraint as loss, but over time something unexpected is discovered. Discipline does not reduce freedom, it creates it. When financial decisions are no longer controlled by impulse, the mind becomes lighter. There is less regret, less confusion, and less inner conflict. Each choice becomes clearer, and clarity itself becomes a form of ease. In practical life, discipline begins with small actions. It appears in how income is divided, how expenses are evaluated, and how priorities are set. Instead of reacting to every desire, there is a pause. In that pause, awareness enters, and with awareness, better decisions become possible. This is where wealth begins to stabilize, not through luck or sudden gain, but through consistent, mindful behavior repeated over time. As discipline deepens, the relationship with time also changes. Time is no longer treated as something endlessly available. It becomes valuable, almost sacred. A disciplined person starts to notice that every financial decision is also a time decision. Spending carelessly is not only a loss of money, but also a loss of future possibilities. This awareness naturally encourages restraint, not through fear, but through understanding of consequence. Another transformation happens internally. The emotional highs and lows connected to money begin to soften. Previously, gain may have created excitement and loss may have created distress. But with discipline, both are observed more calmly. Success is appreciated without inflation of ego, and setbacks are acknowledged without collapse. This emotional balance is essential because unstable emotions often lead to unstable financial behavior. Discipline also brings consistency, and consistency is one of the quiet foundations of lasting wealth. Rather than depending on sudden breakthroughs or unpredictable outcomes, a disciplined approach builds steadily. It may not appear dramatic, but it is reliable. Like drops filling a vessel over time, small consistent actions create substantial results. This removes the pressure of urgency and replaces it with trust in process. In relationships as well, discipline reflects itself. Financial clarity reduces conflict, confusion, and hidden stress. When a person is disciplined with resources, they are also more transparent, more responsible, and more stable in shared environments. Wealth then becomes not just a personal experience, but a supportive force in collective life. Eventually, discipline is no longer experienced as effort. It becomes natural behavior. The mind no longer constantly debates between control and impulse because awareness has settled into habit. In this state, wealth feels more organized, less chaotic, and more aligned with long-term well-being. It is no longer something to chase or fear losing, but something to manage with steady attention. Through discipline, wealth stops being a source of tension and becomes a structured flow that supports a clearer, calmer, and more grounded way of living. True richness is inner freedom. The highest form of wealth is not possessions, but a peaceful mind, one that is not shaken by gain or loss, success or failure. When inner freedom becomes the foundation of a person's relationship with wealth, something profound changes in the way life is experienced. Wealth is no longer the measure of self-worth nor the source of identity. It becomes one aspect of living, useful, functional, and present, but no longer dominant. Inner freedom does not mean rejecting wealth or ignoring responsibility. It means no longer being controlled by fear of loss, craving for more, or the anxiety of comparison. At the beginning of this understanding, the mind may still move habitually toward attachment. It may still associate success with accumulation and failure with reduction. But as awareness strengthens, these associations begin to weaken. A person starts to observe that emotional suffering around money does not come from money itself, but from the meaning assigned to it. When that meaning is questioned, space opens up inside the mind. In that space, clarity begins to grow. Inner freedom becomes visible in how a person responds to gain and loss. When wealth increases, there is appreciation but not inflation of ego. When wealth decreases, there is attention but not collapse of identity. This balance is not indifference, it is stability. It allows a person to remain grounded regardless of external fluctuations. Life continues to change, but the center within remains steady. This stability deepens, decision-making becomes lighter. Previously, choices may have been influenced by pressure, insecurity, or desire to prove something. Now, decisions are guided more by understanding than emotion. A person begins to ask not only what will I gain, but also what will this create in my life long term. This shift reduces unnecessary risks and unnecessary regrets. It brings a sense of quiet confidence into financial behavior. Inner freedom also transforms ambition. Ambition does not disappear, it becomes purified. Instead of being driven by comparison or fear of inadequacy, it is guided by clarity and purpose. There is still desire to grow, but it is no longer compulsive. Growth is seen as a natural unfolding rather than a desperate chase. This makes effort more sustainable and less draining. Another important change appears in the relationship with consumption. Without inner freedom, consumption often becomes emotionally used to fill emptiness or escape discomfort. With inner freedom, consumption becomes intentional. A person begins to distinguish between what is needed and what is simply desired in passing. This distinction reduces waste and increases satisfaction. Even simple things feel more meaningful when chosen consciously. As this way of living continues, wealth loses its psychological weight. It is no longer something that constantly occupies the mind. It becomes part of routine life, managed with awareness but not obsession. This creates mental space for other dimensions of living: relationships, creativity, reflection, and presence. Inner freedom also softens the fear of uncertainty. Life is recognized as inherently changeable. Instead of resisting this reality, a person learns to move with it. This adaptability reduces anxiety and increases resilience. Even when financial situations shift, the mind remains less disturbed because identity is no longer tightly bound to external conditions. In this mature state, wealth and inner freedom are no longer in conflict. They coexist in balance. Wealth supports life externally, while inner freedom supports stability internally. One without the other feels incomplete. Together, they create a way of living that is both grounded and open, practical and peaceful, engaged yet unburdened.